my name is Beck and welcome to a May and June reading wrap up. I'm going to combine the 2 months because my reading slump has stopped me from reading a ton, so there's only really enough for one wrap up combined. And so firstly I want to talk about Heartstopper by Alice Oseman. This is the 4th volume by her. I do have a separate review, so go and check that out. I'll link it down below if you're interested. But I gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed Charlie and Nick's relationship and how it goes more into depth about how they're experiencing different mental health issues and how Charlie is trying to recover from his bullying. And I like that there is that tension in the story, but I also love how that is balanced by all that light and fluffy humor and their relationship in general. If you didn't know about Heartstopper, it's a boy meets boy, boy falls in love kind of story. It's set at high school. It follows Charlie. Obviously Nick is the love interest, and I just really like how Alice Oseman handles all these really big themes, but she does it in a way that's mature and genuine, and that is what came through in this volume. However, I do find that some of it seemed a little bit info-dumpy towards the middle and end, and so I wish there was a little bit more detail about that. But I also haven't read her novels, and apparently that is deeply covered in one of her books in her novel form. So as somebody who hasn't read her books, that kind of fell through for this volume for me. But I imagine if you've read her stories before, then you've got the backstory and you understand more of the context, and so it won't seem as info-dumpy or as fast moving over particular plot points than it did to me. So that is why I gave this a 4 stars instead of a 5. It didn't quite creep up there, but I still really enjoyed it. And I do just like going back to these volumes to just find something cute and fluffy and wholesome, and that is what these always deliver. So it was a 4 out of 5 stars for me. Just as the sun goes behind a cloud. Amazing. And then after Heartstopper, I read another contemporary book. So I'm deviating a little bit from the sci-fi and fantasy that I usually read, but I read One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. I have a separate review for that book as well. And I really enjoyed Red, White and Royal Blue by the same author earlier this year, and now I was so hyped to pick up their new release, and I'm really happy that the publisher sent it to me, so thank you so much to Pan Macmillan for doing that. Again, I'm going to plug my review because Pan Macmillan were awesome and sent it to me early. But this follows a subway romance, but it's a subway romance but also time travel. So we follow a girl named August, and she's kind of trying to break away from everything that has been established about her life, and she's trying to escape her mother essentially, and this court case that her mother has been relentless about pursuing for her whole life. So she's moved to New York, August I mean, not her mother. She's moved to New York, she's doing a course in college, and she's also working at this burger joint as well, and she's got these quirky roommates. And while she's doing all of this and trying to juggle all these different facets of her life, she runs into this girl named Jane on the subway, and she starts to form this crush on Jane. And it turns out that Jane is a girl out of time. She doesn't know why, but she is literally stuck on the train on the subway and she can't get out of it. And so it follows her and August's romance, and all the friends get roped in at certain inadvertent points as well. And I just found it ridiculous but fun and fluffy and wholesome. I really enjoyed it. I didn't love it as much as Red, White and Royal Blue, but it was definitely up there, and I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Casey McQuiston has definitely jumped onto the authors I'm definitely going to buy future releases from list, which is a fairly high standard for me. I don't like buying a lot of books, at least lately, so they have definitely made that list. Up next, I also have a reread, and that is Trader's Blade, the first book in the Greatcoat series. I have a whole review for this one as well. I really outdid myself this month with reviews. I'm quite proud, but this is an adult fantasy, so it is very different from the contemporaries so far, although it's not very long and it follows one character. So if you're wanting to get into fantasy, this is a pretty decent place to start. It follows Falkio. It has a Three Musketeers vibe with him and his friends. 5 years ago, before this story actually gets up and running, Falkio's king was murdered by the dukes, and the dukes wanted power, but the king obviously is a monarch and holds all the power, and so they didn't want the king to hold all the power for himself, so they killed him naturally. And now Falkio and his friends, they used to be law, I guess, enforcers for the king, but now they've really been cut loose. They don't have any purpose in life, I guess. And so they're trying to make a living for themselves and not really succeeding. In the opening chapters, they are sellswords and they're working for this client, but the client gets murdered and then they get framed for it. And so that's really where the story starts off. And I really go back to this for the banter and the characterization. It sucks me right in every single time, and I just really loved this. I did give it a 5 stars on my first read through, and on my reread I found a few things in the plot a little bit amiss, so I didn't give it as high a rating as the first time when I was really caught up in the flow of the story, but I still really liked it and I would reread it again in the future, so it's definitely worth its 4.5 star rating. And then I finally finished a sci-fi that I had been reading for over a month and a half, almost 2 months. And I don't know what happened, but I was in my reading slump and I just decided, you know what, I'm going to start a massively long, slow burning book, which isn't really conducive to a reading slump. So that's why I'm here more than a month and a half later to say that I finally finished it. And it's Empire of Silence. And I did a reading vlog on this, so I have a little bit more of my thought process in that reading vlog. But this is essentially a large scale sci-fi story. So if you like fantasy and you like that kind of world building, it's kind of just that squished into a sci-fi. We follow Hadrian Marlowe, and he's this guy who is the son of a monarch, and this monarch has reign over an entire planet, and he thinks that he's going to inherit this planet, but it looks like his younger brother is going to have that mantle instead. And so Hadrian really suffers from being kicked out of the family, essentially, but he doesn't really understand all of these politics until it comes to a head all in one go. And so you get different stages of Hadrian's life. You get from when he's quite young and when he's experiencing these politics, and then you get later on as he's aged and gone through different trials and tribulations throughout the story. So I like how it went from a political angle to then a rags to riches kind of scenario in terms of power, identity, and understanding, but it really, really took a long time to get there. And so I loved the little moments that we got and the fight scenes that we got. They were very visual and I loved them, but when it came to all the pieces in between, I for some reason just couldn't connect to the characters, and I didn't have that empathy or connection with them that I really wanted, but I did really appreciate the world building. So I think this has really strong world building and politics, but when it came to the characterization, don't get me wrong, I did understand it and I did like Hadrian, but I just didn't care as much about him as I wanted to. And when he got into tight spots, I thought, oh, he's going to get out of them somehow. I wasn't particularly worried because I knew that the plot would push a certain way. So it was a little bit mediocre in terms of characterization, and I read stories mainly for character. If it's got an awesome plot, it's got an awesome plot, but I mainly read for character, and so that's kind of where this fell down for me, unfortunately. So I did give it a 3 out of 5 stars. It's definitely not a book that I actively dislike, and I would eventually like to continue on with the sequels. I think it's a series rather than a companion series, so it takes place directly after this book, which is a good thing because I would like to see more about what happens here. But I think in the future I would go the audiobook route because I've heard the audiobook is apparently really good, and I went obviously the physical copy for this. So I want to continue eventually. It's not really a priority. I gave it 3 stars and it was enjoyable. And then in the same reading vlog, I listened to an audiobook called Artificial Condition, which is the second Murderbot Diaries book. And this is a very short set of novellas about a AI or an android, and they just want to not be an assassin effectively, or a security bot or a murder bot in any kind of form. They just want to mind their own business and get on with their own life, but they keep getting roped into dangerous situations and they don't want to be part of that. I like the way that this story is progressing. I can't really say too much because obviously I'm on the sequel, and also if I say too much it'll spoil the first book and I don't want to do that. So essentially we are in Murdbot's perspective, and it stays that way throughout the books that I've read so far. And while I enjoy that voice, I found that the secondary characters felt lacking because we only got Murderbot's perspective. And so because it was fleeting and because the plot didn't really get time to, I guess, unveil because they're so short, I found that I was struggling to connect with other aspects of the world and the characters when Murderbot was going through things fairly quickly. And there was a massive scene change from book 1 to book 2 as well. So that kind of felt like it was not rushed, but I couldn't connect to it as strongly as I wanted to. So I did give this one, I believe, another 3 out of 5 stars. And so my reading essentially just not tanked, but it flatlined for a while because I just read some mediocre stuff and I really want to be reading 5-star books. And then the next book that I read, I also started in that reading vlog that I'll link down below, and I thought it would turn out great, but it actually didn't. And that book is The 22 Murders of Madison May. It's a bright yellow cover, right? So I thought that it would be amazing and bright and suspenseful. Turns out it wasn't. This is supposed to be a science fiction thriller of a serial killer that traverses parallel universes. So from that premise, I thought this was going to be amazing, and I've liked a book by this author before, And it turns out that I hated this book. So that's quite unfortunate. I gave this a 2 out of 5 stars. And I just felt that the plot really unraveled, not in a good way. The characters were not developed very well. There were very convenient things that happened in the plot to just kind of brush things aside, or things just weren't explained. They should have had more context. They should have had some kind of fallout, and that didn't really happen. So it started fairly interesting, but it just really petered off at the end, and I'm very disappointed in this. So I'm likely going to unhaul it. I think this came out either the end of June or it's going to come out early July. This is an advanced reading copy, so it's a proof. The final isn't out yet, but I do not endorse this book. I did not like it at all. The publisher sent it to me as kind of like a surprise because I tweeted at somebody about it and the publisher saw me and then sent it to me. So I technically kind of half requested it, didn't request it really, just showed a bit of interest. So I don't feel obligated to review it or anything. So I guess this is just my thoughts of didn't love it, not for me, 2 out of 5 stars, definitely gonna unhaul it. And then lastly, I managed to get to another reread this month, which I'm really pleased with because again, I wanted to read more 4 and 5 star books, and what better way to do that than to reread your favorites. So I reread Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. This is about Spencer, and in her culture, they are humans hiding from the aliens called the Krell. So they're on a planet called Detritus. They're living under the surface and they're trying to avoid all of these alien spaceship attacks, and they're very low on pilots. So naturally Spencer and everybody that she lives with on this planet, they all value courage, but they lose massive respect for you if you're branded a coward. And Spencer's father was reported as leaving his flight crew, and for that he's branded a coward because he technically ran away and didn't perform his duty. So Spencer has been fighting tooth and nail against that image and that branding, despite everybody believing in it in her culture. So she wants to become a pilot like her father, and she keeps being cut off at every single point in order to reach that goal because the DDF don't want her to be a pilot in case the same thing happens to her than happens to her father. And I loved this story, but it really took time for Spencer to grow. And while that frustrated me a little bit on my first read through because I didn't know when that was going to tick over, I loved it on this read through because I knew what Spencer would become, and I really appreciated every single step in her development. And this is like a quintessential young adult book. It has every single facet of the story very well measured and very well balanced, and I quite like all of the side characters as well, and I can't wait to see this developed even more, especially after knowing what happens in Starsight as well and seeing this world expand even more with your comprehension and understanding of the inner workings of it. I can't wait to read more, and I know Cytonic comes out in November, which I'm really pumped for. So if you couldn't guess, I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. I loved it, and I'm going to reread Starsight as well at some point soon. But if you haven't yet, check out my July TBR. But that is it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I'll come chat to you down in the comments, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.